Chapter 6 is all about intellectual disabilities. Key terms that it's important to be aware of when you're talking about individuals with intellectual disabilities include what exactly is an intellectual disability. It is a diagnosis that a person can receive anywhere from the moment they are born through the 18th year of their life. And it is characterized by significantly sub-average. And so that basically means you can think of it as severe deficits. They may have severe challenges. Basically, when you look at sub-average, you're looking at something that is definitely significantly below the average intellectual ability, the functioning ability, and the types of areas that it will impact include a person's communication, self-care, self-explanatory again, as I stated about in the last chapter. A lot of the terms are self-explanatory. But when it comes to self-care, we're talking about the basic things. Say, for instance, a 10-year-old should be able to do, bathe themselves. Still talking about a 10-year-old, taking care of their toileting needs, feed themselves, keep themselves safe. These all go into and play a role in self-care. Home living, the type of environment, the things that they can control within their home. Social skills, which we talked about briefly in last chapter. Community use, that can be anything from being able to, go to the park and know how to navigate their way there and back home safely, how to also use the equipment that is at the park, if you're using that example still, how to use that appropriately. Self-direction, knowing when to ask for help and when to, take a step back and just remove yourself from the situation. Health and safety kind of goes hand in hand, knowing when to ask for help, who to ask for help, looking for a public safety officer or looking for a police officer or an adult who looks responsible. Keeping themselves safe, knowing that, if it's getting dark, it might be time to head home. There's things that, once again, the average person is aware of or has been taught. Someone with an intellectual disability may have to be taught these skills, or they may be like my son, who has to have somebody with him at all times to make sure these areas are covered. Intellectual disabilities can also affect their functional academics skill level, and the functional academics, which we'll talk about later on in this chapter, are basically your basic reading, your basic writing, and your basic math skills. Those basic skills that everyone needs in order to function. And then leisure, how they handle their leisure time. Some people with certain disabilities can handle it just fine. My kid does not handle free time well at all. Every single part of his day has to be structured, and if not, then we see an increase in behaviors almost immediately. And then also work. There are plenty of people who have intellectual disabilities who have jobs. Some of them have careers. And so depending on how that disability impacts their ability to learn, as well as to engage in the work environment, if they're able to do both and able to secure a job, because it's easy to get a job, as we all know, a lot harder to keep it, then they too should play a role in society as far as in being a working citizen. Excuse me. Adaptive behavior. This is basically how you go about, how a person goes about adapting their behavior to fit the situation based off of their age. It's important that these skills be taught because, as we know, toddlers it's okay for a toddler to throw a temper tantrum in the middle of Target. They're a toddler. That's what they do. And it's common to see that among, maybe those under the age of 3, maybe even 4. But as they're entering school, elementary age, kindergarten, pre-K, TK, however you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, the hope is that they have developed coping strategies for themselves, how to calm themselves down. Instead of leaning directly into the temper tantrum, they may breathe, they may engage in a little self-talk and tell themselves they're going to be okay. They may be able to take direction from an adult a lot easier. Now, fast forward 5 more years and that child is 10, it's not appropriate in any situation, whether it be school, church, park, neighborhood, for a 10-year-old to throw a full-on temper tantrum in the middle of the street just because they didn't get, whatever they wanted from the ice cream truck, or the fact that it was raining and now they can't go outside and play on the trampoline. So when you're talking about adaptive behavior and it's being taught and or expected, you want the child to be engaging in strategies that are appropriate for their age and the situation. It is also important, like in the last bullet, it says that adaptive behaviors present a more comprehensive picture of a child's ability than IQ scores alone. Well, the IQ score just tells them their intellect, how their brain necessarily functions, how their brain processes information. It does not necessarily tell you how they act in a social situation, how they go about communicating their needs, are they even mature? So adaptive behaviors look at the whole person versus just a score. Cognitive characteristics of individuals with intellectual disabilities: they tend to process information in smaller amounts. So it's going to be important that you chunk the information. If you're explaining photosynthesis, to a class of middle schoolers who happen to have intellectual disabilities, absolutely they can learn the process, but instead of getting caught up in the words of everything, you may want to approach it differently. And so instead of giving them the whole lesson around photosynthesis on one day, you're going to want to spread it out. Give them opportunities to practice it. You may want to focus just on, evaporation, and talk about rivers. You may even want to take a little, if you live, well, my son in middle school went to PB Middle, and so it was easy for them to either walk to the beach or even in some cases they walked to the Mission Bay, which I felt like was a little too far, but it is what it is. And they would talk about, the marine layer, and sometimes they would look at the steam coming off of, not necessarily steam, but they would call it steam coming off of the bay, and talk about how that's the evaporation and how it's leading up into the clouds, and how the whole process. And they may even go through I think at one time they tried the experiment with the bean sprout, and you put it on a napkin and leave it in the windowsill, and then you wait and see the process as the plant grows, or you may have it in a Ziploc bag or things of that nature. You're looking at processes, and I got away from photosynthesis. But if you go back to photosynthesis and you look at a picture of it, and then you have the sun and you have the trees and the carbon dioxide from the people and the environment and things of that nature. So you're giving them the same information that their peers are getting, the average peers are getting, but they're looking at it in a different way. And you may be able to teach that same lesson to the general ed class within a week or two. It may take the whole month to get the photosynthesis process down, but at least by the end of that quarter or that year, depending on where you start teaching that, the student with the intellectual disability will have an understanding of what photosynthesis is, and possibly all of the elements that make up the entire process. Those with intellectual disabilities, and from this point on we're going to call them IDs, those with IDs may have a limited set of problem-solving strategies, and so they may rely simply on that limited set of strategies, and because it has worked for them, they have no interest in engaging in new and different ways to approach it. I had a student, autism, I just want to say this for sidebar, autism falls up under the umbrella of intellectual disabilities in the same way that ADHD, dysgraphia, dyslexia fall up under learning disabilities. And I bring up autism again because we have quite a few students. We have about 13 students right now in the traditional undergrad environment with autism. And a few years ago, we had a freshman who found that using note cards works really, really well for him. And so how he solves the problem of needing notes, whether it be history, Bible class, math, it doesn't matter. He uses note cards. As you may imagine, after a while, this got to be pretty much a tedious project for him because he had stacks on stacks of note cards, and he was using the little binders, and then he's flipping through, and then finally I was just like, hey, let's explore other ways of approaching your note taking, because you can't go through your entire degree program making note cards for everything, and he's a mathematics math major. And I was just like, we got to come up with some different strategies. Well, right now he's still holding really tight to how he's solving this. And he has a note taker, and he has someone who takes the notes for him and takes pictures of everything and puts them on Google Drive. And we have all the things for him, but he will not deviate as of right now as he goes into his junior year at Point Loma in the fall. He will not deviate from using a stack of note cards. And it's working for him, except for the fact that his mom is like really frustrated with the amount of note cards that he has just thrown everywhere because he doesn't really do a good job of organizing them. So you can imagine the anxiety that comes when it's time to study for a test. And whereas he may have, a week's worth of notes on one like clip or binder, he hasn't labeled them correctly. So he doesn't really know if this is for the test or if this is content for another class, or is it for something that's already taken place? Similar to students with with learning disabilities, those with IDs may also struggle with metacognition, which is understanding, linking information with prior knowledge, be able to master it here at the new level, to take it to new knowledge, memory, and attention. So as a teacher, you can see how right now, if you had a student in your class with a learning disability and someone with an intellectual disability, and without knowing anything other than the fact that they have you have two different students with these disabilities, you already know as the instructor, as the child care provider, you're going to have to take into effect how much time the students are being given to practice the information and to make sure it's chunked in a way that allows them to remain engaged and hopefully keeps their attention. As I've shared about those with learning disabilities, those with IDs sometimes struggle as well with transferring the skills from one context to the other. And that's why it's so important that they be given opportunities to generalize the information. And that's where the generalization comes in. You don't want, and that my first time being really introduced to this word was dealing with my son. And I shouldn't say dealing with, but I feel like everyone understands what I mean when I say dealing with. We used to have his behavior therapy, his ABA, which is applied behavioral analysis therapy, take place at the actual center. And we would go, and it was great, and it had all the tools, and it was amazing. And that was basically done for about the first 3 or 4 sessions just to get Caleb comfortable with his therapist. And then we transferred having therapy being done at home because she wanted Caleb, as well as other clients as well, to know and understand that, hey, these expected behaviors are, they're expected here at the center, but they're also expected at home. And so then by holding therapy at home and basically changing the way we did our entire home, from labeling different things so he would know if he saw the word oven, he's already generalized that, yeah, he knows what it looks like in a book, or if you draw an oven, if you do a good job of it, because my son will quickly let you know that's not an oven because it doesn't look like an oven. But you have a picture of a standard oven, and then maybe you have a picture of your oven at home. And then at the time when Caleb was in 4th and 5th grade, I kid you not, everything in our house was labeled, from the door to the sink to the doorknob. There were labels, there were center strips everywhere. But it was one way for him to familiarize all the words with different things, and to understand that, yeah, you see doors all the time, but doors come in different shapes and sizes, and they can be outdoor, they can be doors that go outdoors, or closet doors. I mean, it's all the things, but you want to make sure the child has an opportunity to generalize that information and in as many different settings as possible. So that way the student doesn't get stuck on, yes, I only engage in this behavior, or I know this information only in this setting, because in reality, they're going to need it throughout life. Curriculum options for students with IDs include the core academic curriculum. This first one is basically what the general education classroom is doing. They're working towards the standard diploma. They're working towards taking the state tests, in those key areas, 4th, 8th, and 11th grade. This is the general core curriculum. Then you have your functional academics, which I mentioned in the very beginning, and that's your basic reading, basic writing, basic math. This is usually at a 4th grade level, And basically, if you get to the fourth grade level, you're considered to have functioning academics. You're, expected to be able to write a sentence, paragraph, apply for a job. May not be the job you want, but you know, and of course, then in this case, you would be looking for a job. If you've only been able to achieve functional academics education, then you're going to be looking for jobs that don't require a high school diploma. Life or GED. Then you have your life skills curriculum. The life skills curriculum can be used in conjunction with core academic curriculum. Later on in the weeks, we'll learn about the GATE program, the Gifted and Talented Education Program. These are the students who have surpassed their general ed peers in understanding, but they still may need some life skills curriculum. And this is all about what they need to do in order to be able to live and work independently. And this includes not just being able to get a job so that you can pay rent, to buy furniture and buy a car. It also includes being able to clean up after yourself. You'd be amazed at how many people come to Point Loma their freshman year and don't know how to wash their own clothes. So it includes washing clothes. It may include, calling a doctor, setting up a doctor's appointment, setting up health insurance. It's all those little things, in my opinion, that all students could benefit from. But it's available through special education program in the K through 12 setting. Then you have transition programming. Excuse me. This can be any transition. This can be transitioning from 6th grade to 7th grade. Oh, I'm sorry, because here in California, they do 6th grade as middle school. In the South, 7th grade is where middle school starts. And we call it junior high. But anyway, it could be transitioning from elementary to junior high and or middle school. It could be transitioning from junior high to high school. And this transition programming is going to play out in the student's 504 plan or their IEP. And there's also a transition program put in place when a student is leaving high school, graduating from high school, and headed to, it can be a 2-year or a 4-year higher education program. And transition programming can also be used for those students who are between the ages of 18 and 22. Students like my son are able to stay in the general education setting, basically go to school until they turn 23, and they're in a transition program. And my son's transition program right now is through Elite Academy, and they have him, well, they had him working at a fast food restaurant called, why am I blanking? Well, anyway, he has a job at a pizza place right across the street for him from his school, and he also works at a nursery out in Rancho Valhalla because he loves being outdoors. And these are just different things because his age group is doing the same thing. They're in school, but they're also working, and they're figuring out the balancing of life. Caleb, he will not ever be able to live on his own. My husband and I are his conservators, so we control. He has his choice in every decision that we make, but we control his education, his home setting, his finances, his health, things of that nature, because these are things that he cannot do on his own independently and in a safe manner. So when it comes to strategies for teaching students with ID, one of the ways you can approach it is by using CBI, or community-based instruction. I love this approach because I think it engages the students the most. It gets them out of the classroom. When my son was at PB Middle, every week they had the same routine, but every week presented a different opportunity, a different learning opportunity. And so on Mondays, they would do all the recycling, and they would go around, and some people had issues with their children with the little, I don't know what they're called, but the little trash claws or whatever, and they go around. Well, what they were doing was basically, my son's class was doing, was going around picking up cans. They didn't have glassware, but things of that nature, cans, bottles, any type of plastic. That's what they would do on Mondays. They would sort it on Tuesdays, I believe, and then go on Wednesdays. They go over to the recycling place, get their money, come back, make a list. So on Thursdays, they walk over to Sprouts. They would have a grocery list, and so they would use like their math, and that's where the functional application of the basic skills come. They're looking at, crossing the street. You have your safety and safety awareness. They're getting to the grocery store. They've made a list. They're going in and picking out how many apples they need. They have a recipe. They're incorporating everything that they've learned, and maybe they have a unit on Italy, and they're talking about pizza. And so they've gone and they've learned how to make money. They went and worked that part, and then they got the money, from the recycling place, from doing their work, figured out how much money they had, looked at the circular for Sprouts, picked out what they could afford based off of pizza and different pictures that they saw from Italy, and then on Fridays they would cook. And so now they're seeing the fruits of their labor, which is basically what we all do, but maybe not in such a simple way. But we basically all go to work so that we can maintain the lifestyle, or we're working towards a lifestyle or something. I mean, we're doing it all for something. But every week they did this. And so on Fridays, sometimes they make pizza, sometimes it'd be pasta, sometimes it'd be a PB&J, but it was just something to keep them engaged, and it was something that made all the students want to go to school and, remain at school. So if they started having behaviors, that was the carrot. It's like, well, on Friday, we're going to be doing, I don't know, caramel corn, and the kids get all excited about that around football season time because they want to go out there, and then they make the little balls so that they can sell them, which are things that they can't do now. Even prior to COVID-19, they couldn't do because of allergies and things of that nature. But it's a way to engage the students, and it's a way for it to make it more, just more fun. They remember those things. Excuse me. So you have instructional strategies. You have task analysis. That's where you're breaking down the task bit by bit. We talked about the photosynthesis. That would be a great way to look at it. You're not looking at it as a whole cycle. You're talking about every individual thing one by one. So you're getting a more in-depth analysis. You're getting a more in-depth look at the material. Prompts are a great way as well. It helps to prompt the student if you feel like A, they may not know the information well enough, or B, you're aware of their anxiety around answering in front of their peers. And it's just a way to get people more engaged. You have to just read the student, lean on your own emotional intelligence to know whether or not you should ask the student in the first place to answer a question in front of their peers. But prompting is basically, you can either start to lead with maybe this first sound, or if you see their mouth forming through something else, you can maybe throw them a clue like, oh, remember, last week when we talked about la la la, things of that nature. And you may not be able to go as far back as last week. It could be something like where you're just pointing to the board, or you're just giving them a clue because you want them to be successful. You're not giving them the answer, but this is also when you're just still teaching them new material. So you're not expecting them to know it like the top of their, like the back of their hand and off the top of their head, but you want them to be comfortable with trying, not only just with you, but in front of their peers as well. Cooperative learning, that's basically, once again, putting people together with different skill sets. We talked about that with the learning disabilities as well. It can be very, very helpful to help to get students to understand a concept, because then they are less likely to feel targeted, like you're only looking at them, you're only picking on them. The students are working in a group, they're mismatched for a reason from their standpoint, but from your standpoint, you're putting them together because this person's good at this skill and this one's good at that. And if all the things go well, it should be like a really successful learning opportunity. And then peer tutoring or peer support groups, or peer support programs, excuse me. These are great because it gives the students an opportunity to see that appropriate behavior being modeled by other students who are in the general education setting. And just like with all children, and sometimes adults too, you tend to receive the information better when it's coming from a peer versus, a parent, a teacher, a principal, higher up, an executive. But if another director tells me something like, hey, Nicole, you tend to look really bored in all your Zoom calls, have you ever thought, la, 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 la? I'm a lot more open to receiving it from them than, say, for instance, my boss telling me, you never smile in your Zoom calls. And I'm just like, well, in one of those situations. So it's across the board. Whether you're an adult, you're a child, person with a disability or not, sometimes it's just best to hear that information, hear that feedback, hopefully constructive, from a peer. Simple strategies for teaching. You want to teach in small groups, similar to those with learning disabilities, and depending on how that disability impacts them, you may want to do this in small groups, 3 or 4 students. Of course, this is all based on the severity of the individual's disability, and if you're teaching special education in the K through 12, well, I'm not going to say to 12th grade. I'm going to say maybe K through, it just depends. I guess just all depends on the makeup of the class. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have some additional assistance in the classroom, and it's going to come in the form of a paraprofessional, teacher's aide. I'm not really sure what they're called this now, but when I was teaching, they were paraprofessionals, and I think we got here and they call them teacher's aides. Regardless, you're going to have another adult in the room. And so depending on what's being taught or the nature or the makeup of the classroom, you may be you as the teacher might be the one who wants to lead that small group, or it might be something that the teacher's assistant, can do for you. You want to teach one concept or skill at a time. You don't want to build them all up at the same time or expect them to learn something very, very quickly, because you want to make sure they're able to build on each step and be able to recall it, not only for the sake of assessment, but also for applying it in the real world. You're going to teach the strategies for learning, and you're going to plan for remembering or sequencing the information. Just like I talked about, giving them the sequence for making a PB&J. You want them to be able to recall that information and think about different ways that's going to work for them to truly understand the content, to be able to play it out later on. Remembering how to do a PB&J can be very, very helpful on the weekend when they're hungry, and say, for instance, mom taking a nap and maybe dad's out mowing the grass. Kid is hungry. You definitely want to always be encouraging self-advocacy and self-determination. As long as they have the approval from their parents, they may get to the point where they're allowed to go into the kitchen alone and make a PB&J. We allowed Caleb to make PB&Js, not with a knife, but with a spoon. And it worked just fine. You want to provide ample opportunity for practice. Practice often, but you don't want to overload. You don't want to just give them busy work or have them spending the whole day practicing, numbers, but you want to give them different ways to practice numbers. They may be doing it with a marker. They might use a paintbrush and painting it. You may put a big fat number 2 and then everybody paint around it. And then, you can just get really creative for it. If you're out near the beach, go out into the sand and write the numbers there. You're finding different ways for them to not only generalize, but also practice their information and hopefully learn it. Use prompts to promote correct responding. So when you have the students with the intellectual disability, you definitely still want to give the constructive feedback that we talked about in the previous chapter, but you also want to give the correct, you want to show them exactly what it is that you expect from them. So my son always responded well, he still does, to modeling. I think this is one of the reasons why he's done so well in the group home with his behavior, is because he's seeing other people in the group home who have similar behaviors as his, but then he's seeing their consequence. And so he's seeing that things are being taken away from them. They may lose computer time, or they may lose TV time, or they may not be able to go on an outing. Whatever the case may be, whereas when he was living at home, he's the only child, so it was basically me sharing this is what's happening, you're not going to be able to do this because of this, or I'm showing him a video of some kid he doesn't know who's gotten into the same trouble, and now that he didn't get it. But the moment he started living in the group home, he started seeing consequences for different behaviors, and he's learning from that. And so whereas I know we talk mostly about in the education setting, if you happen to have a student who has a lot of disciplinary issues and ends up with a diagnosis of ODD, which is one of the diagnoses that my son has, and it stands for oppositional defiant disorder. Modeling could be something that's very, very positive for them and help turn around their behavior, because they want to be able to model the behavior that someone that they actually respect is doing. And then they're seeing the praise from it, and they're seeing maybe the guys now, on the skateboard. My son used to love the skateboard and surf, and so we use that as a carrot. Like, okay, well, this kid did this, and this kid went to Target and didn't yell because they didn't get the socks they wanted. And as a result, look, now he's home, he's had dinner, and now he's skateboarding. And so it's one of those things that my son, Caleb, could really relate to, because he too liked to go to Target. He too loved to eat spaghetti, loves to eat spaghetti, and at the time he loved to skateboard. Sometimes physical guidance. Keep in mind you're not to ever touch a child. That's one way to get into big trouble very, very fast. But, it could be a matter of just pointing towards the door or kind of guiding your arms, not their arms, towards the door, or pointing towards their seat, in the general direction, just in case, and I notice sometimes with my son, if he's really in one of his episodes, his behavioral episodes, he may be shouting and cursing, but he's looking directly at me in my eye. And then I got to the point where I learned how to not necessarily ignore the behavior. I made sure he was safe, but I would also just prompt him and say, well, it seems like you're upset. Maybe you should go, hang out in your room. And it was never go to your room or you're punished, because that just heightened behaviors. But if I just said, maybe you should go hang out in your room, and just kind of just casually throw my arm off into that direction. It was interesting. After a while, he would slowly start going there, and it was almost like his subconscious would take over, I guess. I'm not really sure. But next thing you know, he'd be in his room. He's still yelling, and then he gets distracted with maybe a puzzle he hasn't finished, or a game, or in some cases, Caleb would just lay down and take a nap because he would be so exhausted from all of his yelling that he would just be tired. And then when he would get up, and it would just be like nothing happened. And then you want to teach skills that are meaningful and can be practiced often. And that word practice comes up a lot because it's always important that children, anyone really, not just children, all students need to be given an opportunity to practice as much as possible. Self-determination is something that I talk about a lot in my office, even in higher ed. It's something that is talked about a lot in K through 12 setting. And the self-determination goal is a goal that is on all IEPs. All children, regardless of what disability they have, regardless of their age level, grade level, intellect level, whatever the case may be, they need to have a self-determination goal. And this is where they're being taught how to make decisions for themselves. Anything from taking care of their basic needs, of being able to raise their hand to say they have to go to the restroom and appropriately asking to go, or letting someone know depending on the setting, to having their needs met in the community. And it's about self-advocacy also, being able to raise your hand if you need help, or if you're out in the community and you happen to get misplaced from your parent or your guardian, knowing who to go to ask for help, how to keep yourself safe. And it does sometimes need to be taught with students with intellectual disabilities. We had to teach it to my son. One of the reasons why we became his conservators, because he can't master this skill of self-determination. He's really good at telling you what he wants, but he's not good at telling you what he needs. So if he's sick, he will not come and tell us he needs an Aleve because his head hurts. We have to just pay attention to his behaviors. It's also important even for the student who's working towards a high school diploma and going off to college, because once they enter into the higher ed environment, they have to self-disclose. And sometimes parents will start this process off for them and just say, oh, once again, back to Johnny. Johnny is going to Point Loma in the fall, and I want to forward his IEP and this and the other. And we accept the information, but we turn around and tell the parents, this is great. I'm glad your son made it to Point Loma. However, please have your son reach out to us so we can start this process, because we want to create that point of connection from the jump. We don't necessarily want to disengage the parents, but we kind of want to disengage the parents, because we're here, being in the DRC, and it's called different things and at different universities, but we all do the same thing. We basically look at the documentation and create accommodation plans so that hopefully not only the transition into higher ed is a successful one, but their first year is as well. And we have found that when students have had a first good year, or at least a first good semester receiving disability services, they tend to do a lot better long term, because they're engaging in their accommodations, they're using the resources that are available to them, whether they, for all students, not just those with disabilities. And it just builds a rapport. They feel more comfortable walking in. But I mean, truth be told, we still have those students who either allow their parents or want their parents or whatever with their parents. They kind of run lead on it. And we have students getting ready to be seniors, whose parents are still jumping in and, they're not doing too well in class. Can you help? And it's just like, at what point does the parent truly step back? Because your child is an adult according to the law. They had what it took to get the high school diploma, and now they're here in college. Now they're going to graduate. Are you going to do this for them for grad school? What about when they get a job? It's like all the things. So a good place to start practicing it, and I say it for all parents that I've consulted with, is as early as 4th and 5th grade. You want the child to feel comfortable going to their teacher if, the material, even if they just need extra assistance with learning the material, or maybe they want to go talk to the guidance counselor about puberty, whatever the case may be. You want them to learn their voice early and learn how to use it, because that's going to help them feel good about themselves, and it's going to help them own who they truly are, which is someone with a disability. And there's nothing wrong with that, because now they can go ahead and speak it, and they know what works for them and what doesn't work for them. So it's just one way to help build independence, and just helps them build their voice. And I always appreciate those students who contact us and they're just like, this is who I am, this is what I've got, this is what has worked, this is what has worked, this has not worked. I would like to know what you have available. And it becomes a back and forth conversation that always usually ends well, because they understand their disability on them, because they've been given the opportunity to engage in self-advocacy. Pledge to show respect is done by, it's a campaign done by Special Olympics and Best Buddies. These are two organizations that are really, really great for parents to know, and two organizations that you can use in your parent resource manual. Best Buddies is a national program basically pairing general ed students with special education students in different high school settings. There are high schools here in San Diego that have the Best Buddies program. And from what I've read and from the people who I've known who have done it, they said it's a rewarding experience for not only the student with a disability, and it's also just as rewarding for those who don't. And I just love those types of opportunities, because it gives everyone a chance to practice inclusion and to do it in a safe setting. And then there's Special Olympics, another international organization actually. Point Loma had the pleasure of hosting, I think it was, oh my gosh, I can't remember, all these years, especially now. They all feel like one big long year, but quite a few years ago, definitely within the last 7 years, we had an opportunity to host a few, actually I think it was just 2 countries, because the LA chapter was hosting the International Special Olympics, the huge one, the ginormous one, like they were supposed to do in Tokyo. And we had some of them on campus. And once again, and we also have done Special Olympics every year except for last school year. I want to say, did we do it last school year? I can't remember. No, we did not do it last school year, but we used to host the track and field events for the San Diego chapter, for the Southern California chapter of Special Olympics. And it was, like I said, the track and field event. So they had all the running events, shot put, javelin. I'm sorry, they didn't have javelin. They had long jump, high jump, things of that nature. And so we would have our students sign up as buddies. And we would take a Saturday, and it was always in the spring, and the whole day was the entire event. And it was just great to have the parents out there. Once again, another safe environment. As the parent of a child with a disability, and I believe even if my kid didn't have autism and other things going on, I would still be just as overprotective. But it's, once again, a safe environment. Come out, eat, play, family day, and it would just be really, really great. And so I encourage you, if you have not begun to put together your resources, definitely check out Special Olympics, and definitely check out bestbuddies.org. And so to wrap up, when it comes to IDs, they must impact the disability, that is, it must impact 2 or more areas of a person's life, and it must be like, they must be functioning at a sub-average level in order for it to be classified as an intellectual disability. Adaptive behavior should be age appropriate and situation appropriate. You want to always chunk the information when you're teaching students with IDs, and you want to give them plenty of opportunities to practice. Generalization is definitely key. And don't think that just because you're the teacher, you're the child care provider, you have to do it all on your own. You can definitely create little like strategy cards for the students to take home with them and have the parents play a role in it as well. So they could be helping with the generalization of it and maybe even task the parent with, if you know the family goes to church, because you don't want to overstep your boundaries considering everything is not a Christian organization, obviously. Um, but if it comes up and a parent mentions that, yes, we spend most of the day on Sundays at church, then you would say, oh, this would be a great opportunity for Johnny, of course, to practice this. Maybe when he's in, children's church, this might be really great to share with the Sunday school teacher. And so who knows? It's just, once again, giving an opportunity for the student to engage in these strategies in a variety of settings so that it becomes hopefully a part of their norm and not just, oh, I only do this when I'm in, Mrs. Hope's class. And they may engage in 4 different curriculum throughout their life when it comes to learning. And so that was the core curriculum, the functioning, the functional, you had I love how I forgot just off the top of my head, the life skills curriculum, and then the transition programming. Self-determination needs to always be a priority for the student because you want their voice to be heard. You want them to feel comfortable speaking their mind, of course, in a respectful manner. And it also encourages decision-making and self-advocacy. And that concludes chapter 6.